Relay connection established. Archive access granted. Origin unknown. Verification impossible. Proceeding with recovered transmission. Designation, ninth relay.
Most people think lakes hide things because they are deep, imagining black water, sunken cars, and old bones resting in the mud where no one can reach them. That sounds frightening enough until you learn the truth, which is that deep water is honest because it keeps what it takes, and the worst kind of lake is one that gives things back. My name is Nathan Cole, and I was 38 years old when I took the Devil's Lake shoreline contract. I had been a civil engineer for almost 16 years by then, most of it boring work that paid well enough and gave me very little worth talking about. I handled drainage surveys, road expansion, floodplain reports, and soil stability checks, measuring things for a living and trusting maps, elevations, property lines, and numbers because those things did not care what I believed. They were either right or wrong, and that was how I looked at the world before Devil's Lake. The job sounded simple when it landed on my desk. A private environmental firm had been hired to document shoreline changes along a section of Devil's Lake in North Dakota, a place with a long history of rising, falling, swallowing land, and leaving people arguing about what belonged where. Roads had disappeared under it, farms had been cut off by it, and people in that part of the state talked about the lake the way some people talk about a difficult relative, hating it, respecting it, fearing it, and still building their lives beside it. Our section was on the quieter side of the lake, away from tourist spots and boat ramps, where the prairie opened wide and the wind moved without obstruction. I arrived in late October with 2 survey assistants, a company truck, a drone, ground-penetrating equipment, and 3 days of work ahead of us. The air had a sharp cold that made every sound feel clearer than it should. The reeds along the shoreline rattled constantly, and the lake itself looked flat and gray, like hammered metal stretched to the horizon. By noon on the first day, we found the foundations. At first, I thought they were fieldstone piles left from an old homestead, which was common enough since many forgotten buildings had been scraped off the prairie by weather, fire, or time. However, these were not random stones, but squared corners, straight lines, footings, and low walls buried under crusted mud and dead weeds. There were too many of them for one farm, and they ran in rows, half exposed where the water had pulled back, as if the lake had peeled away a layer of itself and revealed a town underneath. My assistant Drew, who was 26 and always chewing gum and making jokes when things got quiet, was the first to say it looked like a street. He was right, as the exposed mud formed a sunken path between the foundations that was too straight to be natural. Fence posts leaned out of the ground in a line, a rusted wheel rim sat half-buried near what might have been a yard, and farther out near the water line something wooden jutted from the mud at an angle that looked like the remains of a dock. That night in the motel, I checked historic maps and found nothing listed there. No settlement, no platted lots, no abandoned town, no church, no schoolhouse, and not even a cluster of structures. I pulled county records and old survey data, anything I could access from my laptop, but the section we were working had been marked as open shoreline or agricultural land, depending on the year, with no explanation for a town-sized grid of foundations sitting where nothing was supposed to have been built. The second day, the fog rolled in before sunrise, thick enough that our headlights turned into dull white circles and the world shrank to about 30 feet in every direction. Drew complained about losing drone visibility, and my other assistant Maria, who had spent 10 years doing field work in worse conditions and was not prone to dramatics, said the whole place felt wrong, which made me pay attention. We worked slower that morning, with every measurement taking longer and every marker needing to be checked twice, as the fog made distances feel dishonest and voices carried strangely, sometimes making it seem like someone had spoken when they had not. Around mid-morning, I found the case wedged under the broken edge of a concrete step, mostly hidden beneath mud and dead reeds. It was a military green hard plastic case sealed with rusted metal latches, and when I wiped the mud from the top, I saw a strip of old tape with faded writing that still read, "Shoreline Survey Record." Instead of taking it as a warning, I found it interesting, which is how most bad things begin, not with a scream or a locked door, but with curiosity that seems reasonable. When I opened the case, I found a portable cassette recorder wrapped in cloudy plastic and 3 cassette tapes labeled Initial Exposure, Church Access, and For Nathan. I did not touch the 3rd tape for a long time. Maria asked if it was my idea of a joke, and Drew denied any involvement, so I assumed another surveyor named Nathan had worked the site years earlier, which seemed possible enough to justify taking the case back to the motel. Instead of reporting it properly, I cleaned the recorder, replaced the corroded batteries, and tested it. When I played the first tape, I heard wind, water, footsteps, and then a man's voice describing an initial exposure survey at Devil's Lake, mentioning foundations, a roadbed, and a dock approximately 50 yards east of a primary slab. The detail about the dock unsettled me because we had not measured it yet, but the next morning, I walked 50 yards east and found it exactly where the tape described. As I continued listening, the tape provided more specific instructions, including the location of children's toys buried near a structure and a warning not to touch a red toy truck. When I found the items exactly as described, including the truck, I stopped Drew from picking it up without explaining why. From that point on, I stopped playing the tapes around the others. By the end of the 2nd day, the settlement appeared larger than we first thought, extending farther inland and under shallow water, with drone footage revealing straight lines beneath the surface that suggested roads and lots. That night, I called a local historian named Elaine Porter, who insisted there had never been a town there and advised me to finish my measurements and leave before I found a church, though she would not explain further. Instead of leaving, I played the 2nd tape, which described a church that would become visible in the fog and warned not to enter through the front doors because they opened inward. The next morning, Maria quit after saying she had heard a bell during the night, even though I had not told her about it. Drew stayed, and we returned to the site, where the fog shifted to reveal a church that had not been visible before, standing intact and out of place. Despite Drew's reluctance, we approached the church and entered through a side door. Inside, the building was warm and clean, with no dust, a steaming mug of coffee, and a calendar showing a date 20 years in the future. When a bell rang, the recorder in my pocket activated on its own and began speaking, predicting Drew's reactions and instructing me not to answer him so he would leave. I followed the instructions, and Drew left the church, after which the recorder indicated he had made it farther this time. The situation escalated as the recorder continued to guide me, leading me to a hatch beneath the altar that opened into a descending passage marked with my name repeated countless times. At the bottom, I found a room filled with equipment and tapes documenting multiple attempts and outcomes, along with evidence suggesting I had been there many times before. The recorder revealed that the lake preserved overlapping versions of events, and that I was hearing a future version of myself who had progressed further. Following further instructions, I found a door that led back to my motel room, where I encountered another version of myself who appeared older and exhausted. After a brief interaction, he disappeared, leaving behind the 3rd tape, which contained instructions from my own voice warning me not to contact Drew, Maria, or Elaine, and directing me to a package in the closet containing tapes labeled with various outcomes of my actions. I left the area before sunrise, abandoning the project and attempting to return to normal life, but Drew disappeared after contacting Maria with a message about the church doors, and his truck was later found abandoned near the lake. The official explanation attributed his disappearance to disorientation, and the survey was terminated, with the lake rising again to cover all evidence of the settlement. Weeks later, I received drone footage showing the church submerged beneath the lake with a man standing on its steps who resembled me and acknowledged the camera. Shortly after, I received another tape labeled in my handwriting, which I have not played. I understand the implications and the pattern, recognizing that each attempt leads to another iteration, each one trying to go farther than the last. I do not know what ultimately happened to Drew or why Maria heard the bell, nor do I understand the origin of the town or the mechanism behind the lake's behavior. I only know that Devil's Lake is not finished returning what it has taken, and that when the shoreline recedes under certain conditions, something emerges that is already in motion. For that reason, I advise anyone who encounters similar circumstances to leave immediately, avoid interacting with any discovered objects, and resist the urge to investigate further, because some recordings are not remnants of the past, but instructions from a version of oneself that has already failed.
Transmission complete. Archive updated. Relay connection terminated. Signal lost.